Look, you've come from a country where the economy is growing, where the labour market's never been bigger, and arrived in a country which is in recession and where thousands of New Zealanders are going to Australia in search of jobs. What, in your view, has gone wrong in the New Zealand economy?
Well, first of all, I'd say things are turning around, and that's welcome. I mean, the difference between Australia and New Zealand economically is basically how we came out of COVID. Now, when Australia emerged out of COVID, the focus of our policies was to ensure that we saved lives and livelihoods. And so our policies were always conditioned by the impact on the economy as well as on public health. And so Australian household and business balance sheets emerged from COVID very intact, which wasn't the case here. And as a result, when demand returned to the economy, our businesses leapt onto it and we surged. And our economy came out of COVID stronger than any economy, certainly developed economy in the world, arguably other than Korea and Taiwan. And so we're very proud of that achievement. So it's sort of a bit of where you start from. I mean, we actually emerged out of COVID economically stronger than when we went in. Our unemployment was lower. And as I said, the balance sheets of Australian households, consumers, and businesses was strong. Small businesses had been ensured to have been able to survive COVID. They haven't survived as well since, to be honest, with so many of those businesses going out of business under the industrial relations laws and various other things that have come in place into Australia since then, and the effects of ongoing inflation, largely spurred on by structural spending increases. So, you know, there's a range of stories in all of that. So, you know, it's a job to sort of get an economy going from what was effectively a standing start here. But I think a lot had to do with how we managed the economic policies during COVID.
And you seem to have some confidence that New Zealand is turning around economically. Is that based on some of the conversations that you've had here? Yeah,
I mean, the government is certainly leaning into reforms. They're certainly leaning into deregulating the economy and what they're doing with the RMA and so on. I mean, I wouldn't pretend to be an expert on these things. I focus a bit more on what's happening at home and in the US and other places. But it's a fairly standard agenda to get things going again, get government spending under control, deregulate and remove the roadblocks to investment, make sure that your taxes aren't too high, in fact get them down where you possibly can. I mean, if you're moving into things, you know, which worked very well for us, which we went to 100% expensing in the back and through COVID, which was enormously important. We invested heavily into training and education, and a lot of that we did off the back, hence I mean, my relationship with Stephen Joyce goes back many years, but I got Stephen when I was Prime Minister to do some work on our training and education system, particularly our vocational training and education system, and we benefited greatly from that.
One of the drives that this current government has in New Zealand is to try to do more to attract foreign investment, and they're moving to these visas where you get wealthy foreigners and try and fast-track residency. I know Australia had a scheme like that.
I had that scheme.
You had that scheme and it's been scrapped. Do you back those types of schemes?
Yeah, I do. I think it's a good idea. I mean, the government in Australia, I think...
Did it work for you?
Yes, it did. And basically, it brought people who were investing in the country, you know, millions in the country each, and who also brought a lot of entrepreneurial skill and talent. I mean, the idea was basically to get entrepreneurial, well-capitalised families to move their corporate base from elsewhere in the region to Australia, and for them to become Australian family companies over time. I mean, Australia's great success in business and economic migration has been one of the key pillars of our prosperity over a century. So it is a good program. You've got to be. It's not what our opponents described as, you know, buying visas. Not at all.
Because well, they also, the chief among their criticisms was that it becomes sort of like a retirement option, that you're attracting people who want the lifestyle but haven't got the sort of hustle. That was one of the issues that they had with it.
It's bogus. That's a bogus. It's just rhetoric because they didn't like the program. and they wanted to put more visas into family reunion and things like that, which has one of the lowest economic values out of the visa program. The best value comes out of your skills programs. This was an investor visa program, and often when they did statistics, they combined it with other elements of the business program and then sort of smoothed it out to suit the argument. So, no, I think the CIV program, you've always got to work on integrity in your visa program in whatever part of the scheme it is. I mean, when I was in government, I was an immigration minister, I was a treasurer, I was obviously a prime minister, I was in social services as well. Anywhere where the government is paying out money or is pulling in money or letting people into the country, there will always be people who try and game it and take advantage of it.
So you've got to watch the fraud stuff.
Yeah, of course you do.
Yep.
Of course you do, and it's just part of it. It's not a commentary on society or anything like that. It can be. There will always be people who will try to take a loan of the system, and no visa program is immune from that. But I think the intent of actually trying to bring capital from places which are not as stable and as secure as Australia or New Zealand for that matter, and have that Western base and access to those markets, it makes a lot of sense, and they have a lot to add to your country, and they certainly were adding to Australia.
The world is somewhat on tenterhooks, waiting to see what the Trump administration is going to do with tariffs. Steel and aluminium are on the table at the moment. You had an exemption, right, last time? Donald Trump in his first
secured by Prime Minister Turnbull,
Yeah. New Zealand didn't get that exemption, though Australia's working on it this time. What would be your advice for how New Zealand should play that with Trump?
Well, our relationships with the United States are different. And particularly in the sort of defence security space. I mean, we obviously have a much deeper invested relationship in that area, and AUKUS is the greatest manifestation of that. We are actually right now, as a result of AUKUS, investing in the defence industrial base capability to build submarines in the US, as we are in the UK, because that helps us build ours. So that is a very deep relationship, and that gives you a pretty big foot in the door.
Do you mean just practically because you're exporting steel for that, or do you mean that those alliances of ANZUS and AUKUS are material and are going to be treated with integrity?
Well, I don't believe there's a closer ally to the United States than Australia. There is not one. There is not a country in the world that can claim a closer relationship with the United States than Australia, and that has been proven over a century. And it is exhibited in things like ANZUS, of course, but AUKUS, remember, in AUKUS, being provided with access to nuclear submarine technology, not nuclear armed, I should stress, nuclear powered, that's the first time that has happened since the late 50s, and it was only ever given to one other country, which was the United Kingdom in the wake of the Second World War. So that sort of tells you the sort of level of trust and closeness that exists in that relationship, and that was achieved over two administrations, both the first Trump administration and the Biden administration, so it's bipartisan. And so that does put Australia in a rather unique space with the US. Now, I'd add to that, there is a massively invested capital relationship of the US and Australia. They are our single largest capital investor, daylight second. It's not China. China doesn't come close to the level of US investment, nor UK investment for that matter. So there's that element to it. They are heavily invested in Australia's economic success. On top of that, we have a trade deficit with the United States. They have a surplus with us. That's an important calculus. It's an important calculus. But I remember when I was talking to Donald about this and sort of saying, well, there is not $1 of tariff put on any good that comes into Australia from the US. Not $1. So you don't have... I hold up Australia when I speak in various places around the world saying, you want to know what a good relationship with the US looks like? The one Australia has. And it's a two-way relationship.
New Zealand has almost none of the things that you've talked about with the US. Does that leave us highly exposed when it comes to tariffs, for example?
Well, you have your own strengths in that relationship. You are a part of ANZUS, you are a part of the Five Eyes, and that is important. New Zealand does have a very unique role to play in Indo-Pacific security, particularly in the Southwest Pacific. I'd say in many ways the relationships that New Zealand has with the Southwestern Pacific are closer than Australia does. They're different types of relationships. We're bigger for a start, and that always brings it to it a different dimension to the relationship. So I think New Zealand has a lot of assets to play when it comes to that relationship with the United States and economically. I mean, even in Australia. Australia accounts for just a little over 2% of aluminium imports into the United States. You know, it's 2/5 of nothing when it comes to the size of what the real game is in terms of what the US needs on aluminium. In my experience, I've always found the President a bit more focused on the steel side than on the aluminium, but they're obviously both important to him. And Mr. Navarro in his administration is an enthusiast.
Indeed. You mentioned AUKUS. In fact, you presided over the signing of that, right?
I found it as my government did.
As Prime Minister.
Yeah.
Now, there's the Pillar 2, which is the non-nuclear technology, military technology sharing arrangement that New Zealand has been invited to join. Should we join AUKUS Pillar 2, in your view?
Well, the nature of that joining, I just should clarify this. I mean, AUKUS will be AUKUS. There won't be another initial in it, either end or in the middle. I don't believe there should be. I think it complicates it. So the three founding partners, I think, will remain the partners, because obviously nuclear-powered submarines is a massive part of the arrangement, and that's not happening in New Zealand because of policy and because of scale. So it's just a non-starter. I think what happens, though, with Pillar 2 is there would be direct engagements with friendly partners like New Zealand, like Japan, like Korea, where you can work together on particular lines of effort, on particular capabilities, programs and so on. And that's where I see the external engagement in AUKUS.
And so that's where you think New Zealand should engage?
Absolutely. And one area that comes to mind is, and where I think New Zealand, and particularly on rockets, has had a, you know, they're ahead of us with Rocket Labs.
Lab, yeah.
I mean, that's,
so
you should be so proud of them. They're amazing.
That's fascinating. So that's the sort of engagement you think that both sides could get something from?
Yeah, to come to the AUKUS table, AUKUS is a highest common denominator partnership. One of the risks you have when you form these things is, you know, then everybody comes and you dilute the whole thing and it becomes rather meaningless. I mean, to participate in AUKUS requires a level of trust, capability and fiscal commitment that, you know, is no small thing. And not every country is going to be able to do that, and not every country would be willing to do it necessarily. But there are specific lines of effort where I think, you know, bringing others around the table and involve them in particular projects. But so there's the, you know, if you turn up and get involved, well, you've got to be bringing stuff to the table, not taking it away. It really is a two-way street. So it's a particular expertise, a particular edge that New Zealand can bring. And New Zealand has that. I mean, it has technological capabilities, it's got amazing innovators. Rocket Labs is a great example of that. And in particular domains. Australia is quite good at the subsea domain. And we're doing things in that area in Pillar 2 now. But when it comes to rocket propulsion and things like that, you clearly have some of the best operators in the world. So, you know, on that basis, you've got something to bring it, and don't forget your wallet.
China is saying you join AUKUS to New Zealand and the trust in the relationship could disappear. And
there's trust in the relationship, is there?
Well, this is what they're saying. And they
always say that.
They're also warning that our trade would be hit. Now, you're a good person to answer this because you faced incredible tension with China as Prime Minister. How seriously should New Zealand take that warning from China? Because they've made it, and the Chinese ambassador in Wellington made it very recently.
Well, they should do that. They should respond to that like they'd stand up to any bully that threaten their sovereignty.
Is that how you see it?
That's exactly how I see it. Don't do this or we'll hurt you. It doesn't become more thuggish than that. And so, I mean, in my case as Prime Minister, I found that bargain unconscionable. And I found China's behaviour internationally deplorable during COVID. CIA now has released their view about this, and you know, I think the lab theory is the most credible. Unquestionably the most credible. And frankly, a little less disconcerting in that if it was coming out of a wildlife wet market, well, they happen every other week in most parts of Southeast Asia. So the fact that it most likely came out of a lab. Now, I'm not saying they did it deliberately. No one's suggesting they did it deliberately, but they didn't tell the world. and millions upon millions of people died. Economies were shut down. What we were talking about before and the lag effects of having to literally turn your economy off and the hardship that has caused and the lack of accountability that China has shown for that global calamity is just astounding. Anyway, we were prepared to stand up to them on all of those things. Yeah, they threw a few things our way, but we stood our ground, and that is another reason why I think Australia is respected in the sort of Western Hemisphere, because we are prepared to do that.
What would you say to New Zealanders looking, when this conversation of AUKUS comes up, and looking at the American presidency and going, gee, do we really want that at this point? Is Trump the sort of leader that we want to throw our lot in with?
Well,
you know him very well. In fact, I think you spent New Year's Eve with him in Mar-a-Lago, didn't you?
I did. And we have a good relationship. I'm not overstating it, but yes, no, we worked together very well and in a friendly way when he was president and I was Prime Minister last time.
And you've got respect for President Trump?
Well, we continue to meet now, and yes, I believe so, and vice versa. And I share his outlook for what he's trying to do. And I think there are great benefits, and we're already seeing it in places like the Middle East and what I hope to see in Ukraine and other places, a steadying hand that brings peace through strength, which the world dearly needs after the chaos of the last number of years, where the world has basically burst into flames. We don't need more of that. Anyway, that's getting off topic. But for New Zealand, look, for New Zealand, you have to make your own calibration of the benefits of participating in AUKUS. Forget what China's. I mean, if you're going to bow to China's threats, well, you've already lost. And they do not respect acquiescence. They might call acquiescence, they may call trust. I just call it subservience. And any self-respecting country that is going to bow to that sort of threat, might want to look up what country means and whether they still qualify under the definition. But on AUKUS, it's a matter of just making that sensible assessment of what can you bring, what does it add, what is the fiscal commitment, and what is the net gain for New Zealand. That's a pure national interest assessment, and that would be absolutely respected. If New Zealand said, we think AUKUS is great, but we think we need to, with the resources we have, to do what we need to do and be part of the broader alliance network here in this part of the world, we think we need to do X, Y and Z. Fair enough. But it's your decision, not China's.
You got an election in this year.
Not me this time. First time in a long time.
It's your old mate.
It is.
Your old rival. Dutton, is he going to win?
I genuinely believe that he can, and it is a real coin toss.
Is that an Aussie version of a coin toss?
What did I say? A coin. Sorry, that's a coin toss. No, yeah, sorry. Yes, it is a coin toss, and that is a remarkable achievement from where we were. And I think politics and the polity in Australia has changed dramatically in the last 3 years. I mean, 3 years ago, it was post-COVID. COVID came from all leaders all around the world, regardless of what side of politics you're on. We all got the rough end of that stick, but including Donald, by the way, and Jacinda and I and so many others. But that said, cost of living is what is going to determine this election in Australia. I just do not see any scenario where the government has returned in a majority in Australia, the Labor government. The best they're looking at is a minority government, and with who I think is a pretty fair question for them to respond to, and their potential partners in that, whether they be the Teals, the Greens or anyone else. Peter and the Libs coalition with the Nationals, I think has a very real prospect of not just being able to form a minority government, but better than that, and form a majority government after the next election. The Prime Minister has chosen to push it out, it would seem, to May. It's his call when he does it. That's one of the few things Prime Ministers get to do like that.
Do you miss it?
No. I'm grateful for the time I had, deeply grateful. And it was an extraordinary time, and it was like working on fast forward. I mean, we had COVID, we had China, we had fires, we had floods, we had mouse plagues, we had cyclones. It was quite a period of time to be in office in Australia, but one that I'm forever be grateful for that opportunity. But I was also very proud of the people who came up around me during that time, and Peter was one of them. He was a wonderful member of my cabinet. Peter and I, together with Greg Hunt, who was my health minister, were the only three to have served all the way through over those 9 years in government. And so he's very experienced. He'd be one of the most experienced opposition leaders going into an election, I think, in a very long time. You'd have to go back to John Howard in 1996 to have someone who was as experienced as him. And he was largely in the security portfolios, home affairs, defence, very important for Australia, and particularly as a Prime Minister. They are issues that dominate a lot of your attention. So, and we were never really rivals, actually. Peter and I he came in a bit before me, but no, we always had a really good relationship and do today, and I'm very pleased to support him.